I heard the knock at exactly 11 o'clock. 3 taps. Not the polite kind that waits to see if you're home. The kind that already knows. I'd lived next door to Mia Callahan for 4 months. Long enough to recognize her knock the way you recognize a song from the first 2 notes. Not because you learned it, but because somewhere along the way it just became part of the background of your life. I opened the door. She was standing in the hallway in a shirt she'd clearly thrown on, wet the fabric still clinging to her shoulders in patches. A towel was wrapped around her head, tilted at an angle that defied both gravity and dignity. She was holding a shampoo bottle not tucked under her arm, not casual about it, held out in front of her like she wanted to make sure I registered it as part of the situation. And there was a single soap bubble, small and iridescent, making its slow, unbothered way down the side of her neck. I watched it longer than I should have. "My water stopped," she said. I looked up. She was already watching me. "Don't," she said. I didn't say anything. "You were about to. I was going to ask if you were okay. You had a whole face happening. Mia, it's 11 at night and you're in my hallway with a..." I gestured at the bottle. "I'm allowed a face." She looked down at the shampoo like she'd forgotten she was holding it. Then back at me. "The pipes made this sound. Like..." She thought about it for a second. "You know when an old elevator starts up and you can tell it's genuinely considering not making the trip, that sound? And then nothing. Dead. Mid-conditioner. Mid-conditioner's worse than mid-shampoo. It's significantly worse. You can't just leave conditioner in Ryan. That's not how hair works." I didn't know enough about hair to argue. I stepped back from the door. "Come in." She did, leaving small damp footprints on my hardwood. I closed the door and took a moment, just one, with my back to the room, looking at nothing in particular and reminding myself of a few relevant facts. Fact: Mia Callahan was my neighbor. She'd moved into the unit next to mine 4 months ago when Mrs. Patterson finally left for Scottsdale, taking her collection of ceramic owls and her deeply personal wind chimes with her. Fact: we had a good arrangement. Easy. Uncomplicated. The kind you build carefully when you've learned what it costs to let things get complicated. Fact: I had not complicated it. I turned around. "Bathroom's down the hall," I said. "Second door. Hot water takes a little while. Turn the handle left first, or you'll be standing under cold water for 40 seconds wondering what you did wrong." She raised an eyebrow. "Specific." "I put it in the building group chat the week you moved in case you ever needed to use it." Something moved across her face, too quick to read. "I remember," she said in a tone that didn't give anything away. She headed down the hall. The towel stayed on her head through sheer force of will. My bathroom door clicked shut. I stood in the middle of my living room and did absolutely nothing for a while. Then I went to the kitchen and poured a glass of water I had no interest in drinking, because standing in a kitchen doing something felt more defensible than standing in a living room doing nothing. This is what 4 months of living next door to someone will do to you. You learn things without meaning to. I knew she left for work at 4:30 in the morning and came home smelling like brown butter and something floral I'd never pinned down. I knew she kept her door propped open when she was home and closed when she wasn't, which made it very easy to know when she was home without technically paying attention. I knew she had a way of laughing where she'd make a small sound first, almost like she was surprised the joke landed, and then the real laugh would follow right behind it, louder than she intended. I knew she was funny without trying to be, which was the more dangerous kind. I'd been careful. That was the thing. I'd been genuinely, deliberately careful. My last relationship had lasted 2 years and ended in a way that left me sleeping on my friend Jordan's couch and insisting I was fine, which was true in the narrow sense that I was functional and eating regular meals, but not true in the sense that mattered. I'd come out of it with a clear and reasonable policy: don't let people become load-bearing in your life before you've checked what they're standing on. Mia Callahan, 4 months in, had become extremely load-bearing without my permission. My bathroom door opened. She came down the hall with her hair loose, now damp around her shoulders, the towel gone. She had on her own shorts and my gray shirt, the one I kept hanging on the back of the bathroom door. She'd clearly grabbed it without thinking, pulled it on, still damp, and it had settled off one shoulder in a way that made it look entirely intentional. I put my water glass down. "Oh." She looked down at herself and then at me. "Sorry. There was something on the door and I just grabbed it. I didn't realize I can go change." "You don't have to. It's your shirt." "I'm aware. You don't have to change. She looked at me for a moment. Not long, just slightly longer than a normal look. Then she turned toward the living room, and I watched her take in the space the way people do when they've been somewhere before but never actually looked at it. Her eyes moved across the coffee table, the shelves, the stack of books I kept meaning to reorganize. And then they stopped. Second shelf from the top, tucked between a software manual and a novel I'd started twice and abandoned twice. A small notebook, and sticking out above the cover, folded but visible, a piece of paper. Her handwriting was on it. Even from across the room, she knew it. She went very still. Then she took one slow step toward the shelf. I had maybe 3 seconds. I said the first thing that came to mind, which was nothing. Not strategically. I genuinely had nothing. 4 months of keeping that notebook on the second shelf without once considering that she might someday be standing in my living room in my shirt looking directly at it. And I had prepared exactly 0 contingency plans for this moment. She reached up and pulled the paper free. It unfolded in her hands. A piece of cardstock slightly worn at the crease, covered in handwriting that was clearly hers, looping unhurried, the kind of handwriting that takes its time. A list of ingredients down the left side. Instructions in the margins. A small note to herself at the bottom that I had read approximately 30 times without meaning to. She stared at it. "This is my recipe card," she said. Not a question. "Yeah, I lost this." She turned it over, checking the back like she needed to confirm it was real. "I looked for this for 2 weeks. I thought I'd thrown it away by accident when I was unpacking." I leaned against the kitchen counter and crossed my arms, which was less a casual gesture and more a structural decision. "You left it on the kitchen counter, the shared one in the hallway, about a week after you moved in." She looked up. "And you kept it?" "I didn't want to throw it away. It looked important." "It's been 4 months, Ryan." "I know. You've had my recipe card for 4 months and didn't mention it." "I didn't know how to bring it up after the first week, and then it was 2 weeks, and then—" I stopped. "It got away from me." She looked back down at the card. Something in her face had changed. The careful amusement she usually carried had gone quiet. "This was my grandmother's," she said. "Her handwriting's in the margin. See this part?" She turned it toward me, pointing to a line of smaller, shakier script near the bottom. She used to write notes on her own recipes, little reminders to herself. This one says, "Don't rush the butter." I stayed where I was. I noticed the 2 different handwritings. I didn't know what it meant. I made this with her every Christmas. She died 3 years ago. She said it simply, without performance, just a fact she'd learned to carry. I have her recipe box, but I couldn't find this one. I thought it was gone. The apartment was very quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry," I said. "I should have said something sooner." She shook her head slowly, still looking at the card. "No, I just—" She let out a breath. "I can't believe it was here the whole time." Her phone buzzed on the counter where she'd set it down. She glanced at it, then looked again, and her expression shifted into something I hadn't seen before. Not alarm exactly, but close. "What?" I asked. She turned the phone toward me. She'd pulled up the camera app for her unit, a small fisheye view of her entryway. The floor was dark, reflecting. "My floor," she said. I looked closer. The hardwood in her entryway was covered in a thin sheet of water, catching the light from the hallway in a way that left no room for interpretation. While she'd been in my bathroom, something in her unit had kept going. She was already dialing. The call to the emergency maintenance line lasted about 4 minutes, most of which was her explaining the situation in the calm, precise way people speak when they are actively resisting the urge to not be calm. I listened from across the room. When she hung up, she set the phone down and stood with her hands flat on my kitchen counter, looking at nothing in particular. "Soonest they can get someone is tomorrow morning," she said. 7 o'clock. "Okay. My floor is currently a lake." "I know." She turned around. "I can call my friend Dana. She lives over in Bolden Creek. It's not that far." "Mia." "Or there's that 24-hour place on South Congress I think they still have." "Mia." I waited until she stopped talking. "You're not driving across Austin at midnight to sit in a hotel because your pipes failed. You can stay here." She looked at me carefully. "You don't have to do that." "I have a couch. It's a good couch. It's held up through worse situations than this. What kind of situations? Jordan's going through something. Long story. I pushed off the counter. I'll get you a blanket. There's an extra pillow in the closet. She was quiet for a moment. Then, Ryan. Yeah. She held up the recipe card. Why did you really keep this? I thought about giving her the practical answer. I'd kept it because throwing it away felt wrong, because it had clearly mattered to someone. Because I looked at her standing in my kitchen at 11:30 at night, holding her grandmother's handwriting, and I decided the practical answer was not the one she was asking for. Because your handwriting looked like someone who cared about every single thing they wrote down, I said. And I didn't want to throw that away. She looked at me for a long moment, the kind of moment that doesn't have a clean category. Then her phone buzzed again. She glanced at it and showed me the screen without comment. A photo from the maintenance app, a timestamp, a case number, a 7 a.m. appointment confirmation. She set the phone face down on the counter. So, she said, couch. Couch, I confirmed. She nodded slowly like she was agreeing to something larger than the word suggested. And maybe she was. I got the blanket from the closet, tossed the pillow onto the couch cushions, and did a reasonable impression of someone who had this completely under control. She sat down, pulled the blanket across her lap, and held the recipe card in both hands like she wasn't ready to put it down yet. I turned off the kitchen light. Ryan, she said from the dark. Yeah, thank you for keeping it. I didn't answer right away, not because I didn't have one, but because the one I had felt like more than the moment was ready for. Get some sleep, I said. You've got the early shift. The living room went quiet. I walked down the hall to my room, closed the door, and stood on the other side of it for a moment longer than necessary. Outside, Austin kept doing what Austin does at midnight in the middle of summer. Somewhere on the street below, a car with a loud sound system rolled past and faded. A door closed somewhere in the building, and in my living room I was fairly certain Mia Callahan was not asleep. I lasted about 20 minutes, not because I had a plan, more because 20 minutes was apparently the limit of how long I could lie on my bed staring at the ceiling before my brain stopped pretending that was a reasonable activity. I could hear the city outside, the low hum of 6th Street still going somewhere in the distance, the occasional car on the road below, and underneath all of it the specific silence of someone in your living room who is also not sleeping. I got up, pulled on a t-shirt, and went back down the hall. She was sitting cross-legged on the couch with the blanket over her lap and her phone face down beside her. Not scrolling, not doing anything. Just sitting in the dark with the recipe card on her knee like she hadn't been ready to put it in her pocket, and she hadn't been ready to set it down either. She looked up when I came in, not surprised. Couldn't sleep, I said. Me neither. I sat down on the other end of the couch. Not close. Reasonable distance. The kind of distance that says this is just two people who happen to be awake and not anything else. You want water or something? I asked. I'm fine. Tea. Ryan, sit down. I had been sitting down. I stayed sitting down. Outside something a mockingbird, probably Austin, had a lot of them started up in the tree below the window. 3 notes, then a pause, then 3 different notes. Mia looked toward the window. I keep forgetting how loud it stays here, she said. I grew up in Portland. Nights were quiet. How long have you been in Austin? 3 years. I came for a job and then just... She made a small gesture with one hand. Stayed. You? Born here. Left for college, came back. Couldn't figure out anywhere else I actually wanted to be. She smiled at that. Not a big smile. The small one she did sometimes when something struck her as true rather than funny. That's a good reason to stay somewhere. The mockingbird changed its song again. The blanket shifted as she pulled it higher. Can I ask you something? She said. Sure. The group chat thing, when I moved in. She turned the recipe card over in her hands. The tip about the hot water handle. Did you send that to everyone or just to me? I thought about lying. It would have been easy. It would have been the sensible thing. Just to you, I said. She nodded like that confirmed something she'd already suspected. I saved it, she said. The message. I don't know why. It just... She paused. Nobody had ever done something like that before. Something small like that, just practical and kind for no reason. It wasn't a big deal. I know it wasn't. That's what I mean. She looked at me. The things people do when there's nothing to gain from doing them, those are the ones that stick. I didn't have an answer for that, so I didn't give one. She leaned her head back against the couch cushion and looked up at the ceiling. I did the same, mostly because it felt less loaded than looking at her. Bad breakup? I asked. Not because I needed to know, because something in the way she'd said that made me think there was a before and after somewhere in her recent history. Is it that obvious? No, I thought about how to say it. You talk about kindness like it surprised you, like you'd stopped expecting it. She was quiet for a moment. He wasn't cruel, she said finally. That would have been easier, honestly. He was just absent, even when he was there. After a while, I got so used to not mattering that I stopped noticing I'd adjusted. She turned her head toward me without lifting it from the cushion. You. Similar, I said. Different details, same general shape. She wasn't present. I wasn't present. That was the problem. I looked at the ceiling. I got so focused on not being too much that I ended up being nothing. By the end, I think she was dating the idea of me more than the actual person. Mia was quiet for a moment. That's a lonely way to be in a relationship. Yeah, I said. It really is. The mockingbird went quiet. The city kept its low hum going underneath everything else. At some point, the blanket had migrated slightly toward the center of the couch, and neither of us had moved away from it. I like talking to you, she said. Like it was a simple observation, like she was noting the weather. We don't do it very much. I know. I think I've been... She stopped, started again. I think I made a decision early on that it would be easier not to. Easier than what? She didn't answer immediately. She looked back up at the ceiling, and I watched the particular stillness of someone choosing their words carefully, not because they were hiding something, but because they wanted to get it right. Easier than finding out, she said, that I'd been wrong about you. The city hummed. The blanket sat between us on the couch. And something in the apartment, the air, the quality of the silence, something shifted in a way I noticed immediately and chose for exactly one more moment not to acknowledge. Then the lights went out. Not one at a time. All at once, the kitchen light I'd left on the small lamp by the door, the standby glow of the microwave. Everything. The building, and from the look of it through the window, half the block. In the sudden dark, Mia said, "You have got to be kidding me." The dark was total. Not the soft kind you get when you turn off a lamp and let your eyes adjust. The hard kind, sudden and complete, the kind that makes the room feel like a different room entirely. Through the window, the street below had gone dim too, just the distant glow of whatever part of the grid was still holding on somewhere past the highway. "Power's out," I said. "Yes, Ryan, I gathered." "Building-wide, looks like." "Also gathered." I reached for my phone on the end table and turned on the flashlight, angling it toward the ceiling so it scattered soft rather than blinding us both. The living room reappeared in pale amber. Mia was sitting exactly where she'd been, blanket still across her lap, looking around at the newly unfamiliar space with the expression of someone recalculating. "Candles?" she asked. "Kitchen drawer, maybe." "Maybe." I'm not a candle person. What kind of person doesn't own candles? The kind who doesn't think about candles until a situation like this. She stood up, taking the blanket with her loosely around her shoulders, and followed me to the kitchen. I found the drawer in question, the one that accumulates everything that doesn't belong anywhere else, and dug through it while she held the phone light steady. Takeout menus, a tape measure, 3 dead batteries I'd kept for reasons I couldn't explain, and at the very back, 1 short candle stub in a glass holder, the kind hotels put in bathrooms. "There it is," she said. "1 candle. Very romantic. It's a utility candle. It's a tea light in a little glass. It's romantic, and you know it." I found a lighter under the takeout menus and got the candle going. It threw a small, warm circle of light across the kitchen counter. We both looked at it for a moment. "Okay," she said. "That's a little romantic. It's a power outage. Romantic power outage." I leaned against the counter and crossed my arms. She leaned against the opposite counter and pulled the blanket tighter, and for a moment we just existed in the small, warm circle of a hotel bathroom candle at midnight, while half of East Austin sat in the dark outside. "We could sit on the floor," she said. "Why the floor?" "I don't know. It feels right for a blackout. You sit on the floor, you talk. It's a thing." "That's not a thing." "It's absolutely a thing. You've never sat on the floor during a power outage and talked." "I've spent power outages looking for the breaker box." "That's very sad." She slid down until she was sitting on the kitchen floor back against the cabinet blanket pooled around her. She looked up at me. "Come on." I looked at my kitchen floor, then at her. Then I sat down on the floor. She smiled. Not the small one this time. The real one, the second stage one, arriving slightly louder than she intended. We sat there for a moment with the candle on the counter above us, throwing light at the ceiling. "Can I tell you something?" she said. "You're going to anyway." "Probably." She pulled at a loose thread on the blanket. "I almost didn't knock tonight." I looked at her. "What do you mean?" "I mean I stood at your door for about a minute before I actually knocked." She didn't look at me while she said it. "I had my phone. I could have called Dana. I could have just dealt with it. Cold shower, whatever. But She stopped. "But you knocked," I said. "But I knocked." She looked up then. "And it wasn't because of the pipes, Ryan. Not entirely." The candle flickered. Somewhere outside, a car alarm went off and then stopped, apparently reconsidering. The city beyond the window was very dark and very quiet in the particular way cities go quiet when something small breaks in their infrastructure. I said, "How long have you been thinking about knocking?" She laughed, small and slightly uncomfortable. "That's a very direct question. You started it." She looked at the candle. The light moved across her face in a way that made everything seem slower, more deliberate. "A while," she said. "I don't know exactly. It sort of accumulated, the way things do when you're trying not to let them." "Yeah," I said. "I know that." She turned to look at me then. Really look the way she hadn't quite let herself do all evening. I live 11 feet away from you," I said. "I know exactly what it's like to let something accumulate." The silence after that was different from the silences before it. Fuller. The kind that has weight. She held my gaze for a long moment. Then she said quietly, "Say something, please." And the thing was, I had things to say. I had, it turned out, been collecting them for 4 months without knowing what I was saving them for. I just needed one more minute to figure out where to start. I told her about Claire. Not because it was the obvious next move, more because it was the honest one, and honesty felt like the only currency that made sense in a dark kitchen at midnight with one candle between us. "Her name was Claire," I said. "We were together for almost 2 years. She was smart and driven and genuinely one of the most organized people I've ever met. Color-coded calendar, never missed a deadline, had opinions about the correct way to load a dishwasher, and she was right about all of them." Mia was watching me with her chin resting on her knees. "She didn't leave because anything dramatic happened," I said. "There was no fight, no moment. She just sat me down one evening and said she felt like she'd been alone in the relationship for a long time, and I realized sitting there listening to her say it that she was completely right." "What do you mean?" "I mean I had spent 2 years making myself so easy to be around that I'd stopped actually being around. No preferences, no needs, no friction. Whatever she wanted was fine, whatever she decided was good. Wherever she wanted to go, I'd go." I looked at the candle. I thought I was being a good partner. I was actually just not showing up, giving her a shape of a person instead of a person. "And you didn't realize it while it was happening. I thought disappearing was the same as being low maintenance." I paused. "I don't think that anymore." Mia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I dated someone like that once, from the outside. Someone who disappeared. Someone who made me feel like I was too much. Not on purpose, I don't think he meant to. But everything I felt too loudly or wanted too specifically, there was always this slight pause before he'd respond. And after a while, I started editing myself before I even said things out loud, cutting the volume down." She picked at the blanket. "I got very good at being the easy version of myself." "What's the easy version?" Agreeable, accommodating, happy with whatever. She looked up. Basically someone who doesn't actually need anything, so there's nothing to disappoint. I looked at her. That doesn't sound like you. That's because you've only known me for 4 months. I've known you for 4 months, and I've never once seen you be the easy version of anything. She laughed at that, the real one, both stages. Then she got quiet again. I worked at it, after. I decided if I was going to be too much for someone, I'd rather be too much out loud than spend another 2 years getting smaller. Good decision. Feels like it most days. She tilted her head slightly. Do you miss her, Claire? I thought about it honestly. No, I said. I missed who I thought we were going to become, the future I'd built in my head. But her specifically? I shook my head. I think I'd made myself so small in that relationship that there wasn't enough of me left to actually miss her the way you're supposed to. Mia nodded slowly. I stopped missing mine about 3 weeks after it ended. What I missed was the idea that someone was supposed to be there, the shape of it, not him. Same, I said. She looked at me. I mean it, I said. Exactly that. The candle had burned down slightly, the light pulling closer to the glass. Outside the window, a few lights had flickered back on in the building across the street. Not the full block, just scattered windows, warm and random. Can I ask you something? I said. You've been asking me things all night. One more. Go ahead. The easy version of yourself, I said. Is that what you were doing with me before tonight? She considered that for longer than a quick answer would take. I think I was doing something adjacent to it, she said. Not performing easy, more like keeping the door closed, because it felt safer than finding out what was on the other side. And now, she looked at the candle, at her hands, at me. Now the power's out and my floor is a lake and I've been sitting on your kitchen floor for 20 minutes telling you things I haven't said out loud to anyone. She paused. So I think the door might be open. I reached over and took her hand. Not dramatically, just reached across the few inches between us on the kitchen floor and put my hand over hers. She looked down at it. Then she turned her hand over so our fingers were properly linked. Neither of us said anything for a while. We didn't need to. We'd both said the important parts. The rest of it could wait a few minutes while the city slowly got its lights back and the candle did its small, unhurried job. Then Mia said very quietly, Same. God same. I looked at her. What you said before, she said, about missing the future you'd built instead of the person, about making yourself small. She squeezed my hand once. I just wanted to say it back, so you knew I actually heard it. I didn't have words for what that did to the general situation, so I just held onto her hand in the dark and decided that some things don't need an immediate response. They just need someone to stay still long enough to let them land. We sat like that for a while. The candle burned. The city outside slowly remembered how electricity worked. Another window lit up across the street, then a whole floor of the building on the corner, then a street light down the block sputtering back to life. The blackout was retreating block by block in no particular hurry. Inside, neither of us moved. At some point, I became aware that the space between us on the kitchen floor had gotten smaller without either of us doing anything deliberate about it. The blanket had spread across both of us somehow. Our hands were still linked, resting on the floor between us, and I was paying very close attention to not paying attention to that. Ryan, she said. Yeah. Do you think about her, Claire? You think? I turned to look at her. She was already looking at me direct in the way she'd been all night once she'd decided to stop being careful. No, I said. Not the way you mean. I'm asking because I want to know, not because I'm looking for a particular answer. I know. I thought about it honestly, the way the evening seemed to require. She and I made sense on paper, but I think we were both performing a version of the relationship rather than actually being in it. When it ended, I paused. It was like putting down something heavy I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. She nodded slowly. Do you know what I felt when mine ended? What? Hungry, she said. Actually hungry, like I'd been so busy managing everything I'd forgotten to eat. I went home and made myself a full meal at 10 o'clock at night and sat at my kitchen table and ate all of it and thought, oh, this is what it feels like to want something and just have it. I looked at her. That's a good story. I thought so. A small smile. Then it faded into something more serious. I'm not going to do that again. Manage myself out of my own life. No, I said. I don't think you are. She looked down at our hands. I'm not asking you to promise me anything tonight. I want to be clear about that. This isn't a negotiation or an ultimatum or whatever. She stopped, started again more carefully. I came to your door tonight because I wanted to. Not because of the pipes, not because I had nowhere else to go. I could have figured something out. I came because I wanted to be near you, and that scared me enough that I almost didn't. I know, I said. I know that's what happened. And I need you to know that I'm not going to disappear on you. If this goes somewhere, if we let it, I'm not going to become the easy version. I'm going to be loud about things. I'm going to care too much about flour types and butter temperatures and whether the basil is fresh. I'm going to be a lot. Mia. I'm just saying, Mia. I waited until she stopped. I'm not asking you to disappear. I'm asking you to stay exactly as loud as you are. She went very still. I've been paying attention to you for 4 months, I said. The real version, not the door-closed version. The version that argues about produce in grocery stores and saves group chat messages and cried in her car over soup and kept going anyway. I paused. That's the version I've been trying very hard to be careful about. And I'm done being careful. She stared at me. You knew about the soup? You told me about it 3 weeks ago. You said it like it was funny, but it wasn't. She exhaled. It wasn't, she agreed quietly. I lifted my free hand and touched her face carefully, giving her time to move if she wanted to. She didn't move. Her eyes stayed on mine. Can I ask you something? She said. Yeah. If I'd knocked on your door on a normal night, no broken pipes, no blackout, just knocked, would you have let me in? I thought about it. Really thought about it because she deserved that. Eventually, I said. I think I was getting there. Slowly. How slowly? Slower than tonight. The corner of her mouth lifted. I think I did us a favor. Your pipes did us a favor. I'll send them a thank you note. She looked at me. Ryan. Yeah. I kept a recipe card for 4 months, she said softly, echoing my words back in a different shape. How real do you need this to be? I leaned forward and kissed her. It was quiet and unhurried, the way the whole evening had been building toward something without announcing it. She made a small sound and her hand came up to the side of my face, and I thought with the one part of my brain still capable of forming coherent sentences that this was what it felt like to not disappear, to actually show up, to be the whole person in the room. When we broke apart, she kept her eyes closed for a moment. Then she said, I kept a recipe card for 4 months. How real do you need it to be? I laughed. She opened her eyes, smiling. I just wanted to say it too, she said. Outside, the streetlight directly below the window buzzed back to life, throwing familiar orange light across the ceiling. The power was back. The city had sorted itself out. Neither of us mentioned it. Her alarm went off at 5:53. Not a gentle sound, the kind of alarm that means business sharp, insistent, the audio equivalent of someone grabbing you by the shoulders. I was closer to her phone than she was, which is how I ended up silencing it before she'd fully surfaced from sleep. She made a sound into the pillow that was not a word. 5:53, I said. Another sound, slightly more hostile. You have work. She opened one eye. The room was still mostly dark, the early Austin sky doing that particular shade of purple-gray it gets before it commits to morning. She was on the left side of my bed. We'd moved from the kitchen floor at some point past 2, somewhere between the power coming back and the conversation finally running out of steam, which it had done gradually and without announcement the way good conversations end. She looked at me, then at the ceiling, then back at me. This is real, she said, not a question. Yeah. She closed her eye again. Okay. A pause. I have to go make pastry for 40 people. I know. Croissants specifically, which take 3 hours minimum if you don't want them to taste like regret. Go. She didn't move for another 30 seconds. Then she sat up, pushed her hair back, and looked around my room with the methodical expression of someone locating their exit route. She found her shorts on the floor. My shirt. She looked at it, then at me. I'm keeping this, she said. I know. She pulled it on, found her phone, found her shampoo bottle on the nightstand where she'd apparently put it at some point during the night without either of us noticing. She stood in the middle of my room holding it and looked at me in a way that didn't have a clean category. Ryan. Yeah. Last night. Was real, I said. I already answered that. Something in her face settled. Okay. She leaned down and kissed me brief, certain morning honest in a way that felt more significant than the longer ones had. Then she straightened up and walked out. I listened to the front door close. Then I lay on my back and looked at the ceiling for a while, doing nothing in particular, except existing in the specific aftermath of a night that had rearranged things. At 7:15, my phone buzzed. Jordan, why is there a shampoo bottle on your kitchen counter? Jordan, Jordan. Ryan, I'd forgotten he had a spare key for emergencies. I had a feeling his definition of emergency and mine were diverging rapidly. Me long story Jordan is the long story named Mia Jordan because I'm looking at a shampoo bottle that is definitely not yours and a blanket on your kitchen floor, and I'm doing math. Me, please stop doing math, Jordan. I've been doing this math for 3 months. Jordan, I'm very good at it. Jordan, also there's a piece of paper on your counter with handwriting that isn't yours. I sat up. I hadn't seen her leave anything. Me, what does it say, Jordan? It says, "Thank you for the hot water. M. Jordan." And then underneath that, in smaller writing, it says, "Also the other stuff. Jordan Ryan. Jordan Ryan. Me go home. Jordan Jordan. I am home. This is your apartment. I have a key. Jordan, I'm making coffee. Jordan, you're going to tell me everything." I put the phone face down on the mattress and smiled at the ceiling for a moment before I could stop myself. By the time I got to the kitchen, Jordan had found the good coffee and was leaning against the counter with the expression of a man who had been waiting patiently for months and considered his patience recently and thoroughly vindicated. He looked at me, at the blanket still on the floor, at the candle stub on the counter, back at me. "The shampoo bottle," he said. "Her pipes burst." "Sure." They did. Her floor flooded. And the candle, power went out. And the note that says also the other stuff. I poured myself coffee. "We talked." Jordan stared at me. "You talked?" "For a while, yeah." He put his mug down. "Ryan, I have watched you find 17 different reasons to not talk to that woman for 4 months. I have watched you reorganize your schedule around her schedule while pretending you hadn't noticed her schedule. I have watched you." He stopped. "You know what, it doesn't matter. Did you finally tell her?" "Something like that. Something like that." He picked his mug back up. "I need you to know I've been waiting for this since approximately the 2nd week of October." "You could have said something." "I did say something, multiple times. You said, 'It's not like that.' I was wrong." He looked at me over the rim of his mug with the satisfaction of a man who had been right for a very long time and was only now being allowed to enjoy it. "Yeah," he said. "You were." We drank our coffee. Outside the window, Austin had finished deciding it was morning and was getting on with it, the light going from gray to gold, the street below starting to accumulate its usual sounds. At 9:47, Mia texted, "Mia croissants survived, Mia no casualties. Me proud of you both. Mia dinner tonight." I looked at that for a moment. Simple. Direct. No hedge, no qualifier, no easy version softening around the edges. Just a question from someone who had decided to want things out loud. Me, yes, I'll find somewhere good. Mia, no sports bars. Me, obviously Mia, and nowhere that describes itself as elevated me that eliminates half of Austin Mia good. The other half is probably better anyway. Jordan was reading over my shoulder. I moved the phone. "She's not wrong about elevated," he said. "Go home, Jordan." "I live here temporarily." "You don't." He finished his coffee, rinsed the mug with the particular care of someone who wants to appear useful, and grabbed his jacket. At the door, he paused. "For what it's worth," he said, "I think she's been waiting longer than last night." He left before I could answer. I stood in the kitchen with my coffee going cold and thought about a woman who argued about flower types and kept group chat messages and had stood outside my door for a full minute before knocking. Then I opened a new tab and started looking for restaurants. Dinner was good. I mean that in the way that undersells it completely. We went to a small Italian place on South Congress with red awnings and handwritten menus and wine that came in a carafe without anyone asking. We sat across from each other for 3 hours and talked the way people talk when they've already gotten past the part where you're deciding whether to trust someone. She told me about culinary school in Portland, the instructor who threw a student's souffle out a second-floor window to demonstrate a point the month she survived on staff meal and stubbornness. I told her about the 6 months I spent editing corporate videos after college, the specific despair of making insurance explainer content look cinematic. She laughed at that for a long time, the real laugh both stages. Walking home, she took my hand at the crosswalk on South Congress and didn't let go for the remaining 4 blocks. At our building door, she kissed me in the yellow light of the entrance, unhurried, like she wasn't worried about what it meant or where it was going. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," I agreed. That was 3 weeks ago. In those 3 weeks, some things changed and some things stayed exactly the same, which is probably the most honest way to describe what happens when something that was already there finally gets acknowledged. She still left at 4:30. I still heard her keys in the hallway. We still passed each other the coffee in the morning, except now there was a variable that hadn't existed before. A brief pause in the passing, a look that lasted a half-second longer than practical. Her pipes got fixed on the Tuesday after that first night. A crew came, made significant noise for 3 hours, and left her with functional plumbing and a large damp patch on the hallway floor that dried by Thursday. She stayed in my apartment until Friday, not because she had to. Her unit was livable by Wednesday. But Wednesday night she showed up at my door at 11 with leftovers from the restaurant and a look that dared me to comment on the timing, and I didn't, because I wasn't interested in making a point. We were careful in public. Not secretive, just careful. The building had a way of knowing things, and we weren't ready to be something the building knew about yet. Priya apparently had other ideas. I'd heard her name before the colleague from Lenoir, Mia's closest friend at work. I knew she existed the way you know background details about someone's life, present but unexamined. The first time I met her was a Saturday morning. I was coming back from a run when she was leaving our building. She'd been up visiting Mia, dropping off something from the restaurant. We crossed paths at the front door. She was taller than I'd pictured, with a quick evaluating look that cataloged me in about 2 seconds. "You're Ryan," she said. "Yeah. Mia's mentioned you." She said it without inflection, which somehow made it feel like more of a statement than less. "Good things, I hope." She smiled. "Of course." She held the door for me. "It's nice to finally put a face to it." She left. I stood in the lobby for a moment, and I couldn't have told you why, but something about the exchange sat slightly wrong, the way a note does when it's almost in tune. I didn't mention it to Mia. 3 days later, Mia came home quieter than usual. Not upset, just slightly internal, the way she got when something was running in the background. We were in my kitchen. She was showing me the difference between 2 types of rolling technique because I'd asked an innocent question about pastry dough, and in the middle of demonstrating, she stopped. "Priya thinks we're moving too fast," she said, to the counter, not to me. I waited. She said it in a nice way. She's worried. She thinks living next door and dating is a lot of overlap, and if it goes wrong... Mia set down the rolling pin. She made some good points. "What did you say?" I said I'd think about it. She looked up. "I'm not actually going to think about it. I just didn't want to have the argument." "What would the argument be?" "That I'm an adult who can make my own decisions about my own life." She said it evenly, without heat. "Which is true, but Priya worries. She does that." I nodded. "Okay. You're not going to weigh in. You just said you're an adult who can make your own decisions." She looked at me for a moment. Then the corner of her mouth turned up. "See, that's annoying. You can't just agree with me when I'm trying to work something out. You weren't asking for my opinion. You were thinking out loud." "How do you know the difference?" "You look at me when you want my opinion. You were looking at the counter." She stared at me. "That's very observant." "I've been paying attention." She picked the rolling pin back up. "Priya means well," she said, returning to the dough. "She's been a good friend. She just..." A small pause. "She worries." I watched her work for a moment. The even practiced pressure, the way she read the dough by feel. "Yeah," I said. "I'm sure she does." 2 weeks later, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. A short message. Hi Ryan, it's Priya, got your number from the building directory. Would you be able to meet for coffee? I'd love to talk. It's about Mia. I'm a little worried about her and I think it would help to chat. I read it twice. Then I texted back, sure. When works for you? I didn't tell Mia. Priya arrived 4 minutes late, which felt intentional. She had that quality some people have of making their entrance feel like something you should have been preparing for. Ordered without looking at the menu. Sat down, arranged herself, and looked at me the way a person looks when they've already decided how the conversation is going to go and are simply waiting for you to catch up. Thanks for coming, she said. I know this is a little unusual. You said it was about Mia. It is. She wrapped both hands around her cup. She's one of my closest friends. 2 years. I've watched her go through a lot. A small pause waited. I've watched her make some choices that didn't serve her. Okay, she doesn't always see it when it's happening. That's not a criticism, it's just how she's wired. She feels things very intensely, and sometimes that intensity, Priya tilted her head, it can look like clarity when it's actually just momentum. I said nothing. The situation with you, she continued. I'm not saying your feelings aren't real, I'm sure they are, but the circumstances. Broken pipes, a blackout middle of the night, that's not a foundation. That's a setting. And Mia has a history of mistaking a very good setting for something more structural. What kind of history? She smiled, patient and practiced. Her last relationship. Did she tell you about it? Some. Did she tell you how it ended, her side of it specifically? Something in her tone had shifted, still warm on the surface, but with an edge underneath that hadn't been there 30 seconds ago. Because what Mia remembers and what actually happened, a small diplomatic pause, there's sometimes a gap. I looked at her. What are you saying? I'm saying she's not always the easiest person to be with. She's intense, she's particular, she has very specific ideas about how things should go, and when reality doesn't match those ideas, she tends to, Priya paused, selecting her word carefully, rewrite things. Not maliciously. It's almost unconscious. But the people around her end up carrying the weight of a version of events that wasn't entirely... Stop. She blinked. I need you to stop right there, I said. The coffee shop kept going around us, espresso machines, background music, someone laughing too loudly at the counter. None of it touched our table. I've listened to everything you've said, I continued, and I want to make sure I understand it correctly. You're telling me that Mia, your closest friend 2 years, is someone who rewrites reality, can't be trusted to know her own mind, and has a history of being difficult to be with. I paused. Is that an accurate summary? Priya opened her mouth. That's not exactly... Because here's what's interesting. I leaned forward, not aggressively, just close enough that there was no comfortable distance left between us and what I was about to say. I've spent 4 months living 11 feet away from Mia Callahan. I've seen her at 4:30 in the morning heading to work. I've seen her come home exhausted and still care about every single detail of what she made that day. I've had actual conversations with her, not the managed version, not the one she presents to people she's not sure about yet. The real one. I watched Priya's expression carefully. And nothing, not one thing you've said in the last 10 minutes sounds like her. Ryan. It sounds like someone who needed a version of her that was smaller, more manageable. I sat back. And I think you got so used to that version that the real one started to bother you. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than the ones before it. Priya's face had done something interesting. The warmth hadn't disappeared exactly, but it had thinned the way ice thins in early spring. Still there, still technically holding, but you wouldn't want to put any weight on it. I'm not the bad guy here, she said quietly. I didn't say you were. I genuinely care about her. I think you do, I said. I think that makes it more complicated, not less. I stood up, left money on the table. But I think this conversation was less about protecting Mia and more about what happens to your friendship if she stops needing to be protected. I looked at her one last time. That's worth thinking about. I walked out. The afternoon sun hit me sideways, bright and indifferent. I stood on the sidewalk, hands in my pockets, and took one long breath of East 6th Street air. Then I saw her, 8 feet away, completely still. A paper bag hanging from one hand, earbuds loose in the other, not in her ears. Her eyes were on me with an expression I had never seen on Mia Callahan before in 4 months of close proximity and careful observation. She looked like someone who had been quietly demolished and was choosing very deliberately not to show it. "How long?" I said. Her jaw moved once. "Long enough." The paper bag crinkled as her grip tightened. She was not going to cry. I could see the decision being made in real time, the chin staying level, the shoulders staying square. Mia Callahan was not going to cry on East 6th Street in front of me or anyone else, and the effort of that was the most honest thing I'd seen all afternoon. "She said I rewrite things," Mia said, flat, precise. "That I can't be trusted to know what actually happened." A pause. "She's said smaller versions of that to me before. I always thought she was—" She stopped, restarted. "I thought that was what honesty looked like." "Mia, don't!" Her voice cracked slightly on the word. Just slightly, like a single tile shifting in an otherwise solid wall. "Don't say something nice right now. I'm serious. I know the barista in there. I know the guy who owns the plant shop next door. I have a professional reputation on this block, and I am holding it together by a very thin margin, so please—" "Okay," I said, "I won't." She exhaled, a long, slow, structural exhale. Then she held out the paper bag. "Kuinaman. It's best when it's still warm." I took it. Our fingers overlapped briefly on the bag, and neither of us moved away from that. "Why did you say all that to her?" she asked. Quietly, not looking at me. "You didn't have to." "I know." "So why?" I looked at her profile in the afternoon light, the angle of her jaw, the deliberate steadiness of her posture, the thin margin she'd mentioned that she was holding everything together by. "Because it was true," I said. "And you weren't in there to say it yourself." She was quiet for a long moment. Then her hand found mine, not gently, not tentatively, but with the firm, specific grip of someone who has just been reminded what solid ground feels like and is not letting go of it. We started walking. 4 blocks. No words. Just the afternoon and the city and her hand in mine holding on like something that had finally decided to stop being careful. We walked home slowly. Not because it was far, it wasn't maybe 6 blocks. But neither of us was in a hurry, and Austin in the late afternoon had that particular quality it gets in the early fall when the heat finally starts thinking about leaving. The light came in low and gold across the buildings. Someone was playing guitar somewhere on a porch we couldn't see. She didn't say much. Neither did I. We'd both said the important things already or heard them said, which amounted to the same thing. At the corner of our block, she stopped walking. "I need to say something," she said. "Okay." She turned to face me. In the low light with the paper bag still in one hand and her hair doing something complicated from the afternoon wind, she looked exactly like herself. Not a careful version. Not the door-closed version. Just Mia standing on a sidewalk in Austin deciding to say a thing out loud. "I've spent a long time," she said, "making sure I never needed anyone more than they needed me, keeping it even, keeping it safe." She looked at me steadily. "I don't want to do that with you." "Good," I said. "Don't. I'm serious. I know I'm serious too." She studied me for a moment. Then she stepped forward and kissed me on the corner of our block in the gold afternoon light, one hand still holding the paper bag, the other finding the front of my shirt. I put my arms around her and kissed her back and didn't think about anything at all. When she pulled back, she was almost smiling. "Okay," she said. "Okay," I agreed. We went upstairs. 6 months later, we moved. The new apartment was on the 4th floor of a building near Zilker Park, with windows that faced the greenbelt and a kitchen large enough that 2 people could actually exist in it simultaneously without a choreography system. It cost more than either of us had been paying separately, which Mia addressed by pointing out that the oven had exceptionally good energy, and I addressed by not arguing with a woman who understood things about ovens that I didn't. Moving day was a Saturday in late March. Jordan came and carried boxes while making continuous commentary. By late afternoon, the furniture was roughly where it belonged and the boxes were stacked against every available wall, and we were sitting on the kitchen floor again because apparently that was our place, eating tacos from the place on Barton Springs that Mia had decided was non-negotiable. "This is a good floor," she said. "Better than the last one." She considered it seriously. "Different. The last one had more dramatic circumstances. This one has better tacos. True. She looked around at the boxes at the windows at the greenbelt going gold in the late afternoon outside. I like it here. Yeah, I said. Me too. After Jordan left, she unpacked the kitchen while I assembled what I was assured was a straightforward shelving unit, and was not. At some point I looked up and she was standing on the other side of the room holding something small looking at it. The recipe card. She'd kept it. Obviously, she'd kept it. I'd given it back to her on the night I found out she'd been looking for it, and she'd folded it carefully and put it in her jacket pocket, and we'd never specifically discussed it again. She crossed the room and pressed it into my hand. Put it somewhere, she said. Where? She looked around at the half-assembled shelves, the stacked boxes, the new kitchen, still figuring out what it was. Somewhere you'll see it, she said. Every day. I found a small frame at the bottom of a box, the kind that usually holds a photo, and put the recipe card in it and set it on the kitchen windowsill where the light hit it in the mornings. 2 handwritings, a list of ingredients, a note at the bottom that said, "Don't rush the butter." She stood next to me and looked at it. Good, she said. That was 6 months ago, which brings us to a Tuesday evening in early summer, the first real heat of the year pressing against the windows, the greenbelt shimmering outside. I was on the couch reading something I wasn't fully concentrating on. Mia was in the kitchen doing something that smelled like brown butter and vanilla. Then I heard 3 knocks, from inside the apartment, on the kitchen door frame. Her version of the knock, quick, deliberate, slightly unnecessary given that we lived together and she was 12 feet away. I looked up. She was leaning against the door frame in an old shirt and bare feet, and she had an expression on her face that sat somewhere between amused and something softer. My water died, she said. I looked at her. We have central plumbing. Emotionally, Ryan. She tilted her head. Emotionally, my water died. I put the book down. Can I stay in here tonight? She said. I looked at her standing in the doorframe of our kitchen in our apartment 12 feet away from me on a Tuesday evening with the summer pressing at the windows and something on the stove that smelled like every good thing. Every night, I said. She smiled, the real one, both stages arriving louder than she intended. Then she went back to the stove and I went back to my book, and outside the greenbelt did what greenbelts do in the early Austin summer, and inside everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. Here is what I know about the night Mia Callahan knocked on my door. It wasn't about the pipes. It wasn't about the blackout or the borrowed shirt or the one candle we found at the back of a kitchen drawer. Those were just the circumstances. The circumstances were almost beside the point. What it was actually about was this 2 people who had spent months building careful, reasonable, well-constructed reasons not to want something, and one night where all of those reasons ran out of room. We talk about falling in love like it's an accident, like you're walking along and suddenly the ground isn't there. But I don't think that's what happens. I think you make 100 small decisions to keep the door closed. And then one night, for no reason you can fully explain, you just don't. You open it. And the thing you were protecting yourself from walks in and sits on your kitchen floor and tells you the truth about herself, and you tell her the truth about you. And somewhere in that exchange, something shifts permanently. The scary part isn't falling. The scary part is deciding to stop gripping the ledge. Mia taught me that. Not in a lesson, not in a speech. In the way she held a recipe card that smelled like her grandmother's kitchen and didn't pretend it didn't matter. In the way she stood on a sidewalk on East 6th Street and held herself together by a margin she admitted out loud was thin. In the way she reached for my hand without looking over like she'd already decided it belonged there and was done waiting for permission to act on that. I spent a long time making myself easy to be around by making myself impossible to actually reach. I thought that was the same as being low maintenance. It wasn't. It was just a slower way of being alone. If you're doing that, if you're somewhere in the middle of a careful, reasonable arrangement with someone and you keep finding excuses to keep the door closed, I'm not going to tell you what to do. But I'll tell you what I know. The ledge is not as safe as it feels. And the person on the other side of that door might be standing there longer than you think, waiting to see if you're going to open it. Sometimes the pipes have to break. Sometimes the power has to go out. Sometimes it takes a shampoo bottle and a soap bubble and a recipe card that's been sitting in someone's notebook for 4 months before 2 people finally say the thing they've been not saying. But sometimes, if you're paying attention, you don't have to wait for the pipes to break. You can just knock. If this story stayed with you, Leave a comment below, I'd love to know. Have you ever had a moment where the circumstances did the deciding for you, or a time you finally just knocked? Tell me about it. And if you know someone who needs to hear this today, share it with them. Sometimes the right story finds people at exactly the right time. Subscribe if you want more. I'll see you in the next one.